talking about freedom today. If you live in a free society, you probably love freedom. Everybody thinks that they love freedom. And maybe even more than they think. Everybody genuinely loves freedom. You know, we watch movies like Braveheart where people give their lives to be free. People are willing to die for freedom. People are willing to kill for their freedom. People feel oppressed and their lives are miserable when they don't have freedom. But what is freedom? That's the first question, right? How do we define freedom? Let's just for now call it the ability to do whatever you want. Let's start with that and then we'll zoom in on it a little bit more. Now, if freedom is the ability to do what you want, then absolute freedom would be the ability to do absolutely whatever you want. Now, does anybody have absolute freedom? No. For one, if you live in America, you can't go driving down the highway at 100 miles per hour. You'll get pulled over and arrested. So that's one thing that we can also say about freedom. It's the ability to do whatever you want without having some negative consequences coming to yourself. So you could potentially drive down the highway at 100 miles per hour, but that doesn't mean there aren't going to be any consequences for that. And so with that in mind, we would say, yeah, you're not free to drive at 100 miles per hour down the highway. But let's imagine that there were no people involved to stop you from doing whatever you wanted. Then would you have absolute freedom? The answer is no, because nature also stops you from doing everything you want. So, for example, I want to be able to fly around like Superman. No planes, no kind of apparatus needed, just and there we go. Now, can I do that? No, because nature determines that I cannot. There's gravity. I don't have any kind of ability to do that on my own, so nature hinders me from anything like that. Nature hinders me from doing a lot of things. So people do not have absolute freedom. So the maximum amount of freedom that we could get individually, we would call natural freedom. It's what nature allows and nobody else hinders. Now, that's all well and good when you're by yourself. If you're living on an island by yourself, congratulations. You have natural freedom. You have all the freedom in the world. Nobody's going to stop you. Now, most people don't want to live on an island by themselves because other people can actually help us to do things that we want to do. So if you're living on an island by yourself, you're probably not going to be able to develop a computer all by yourself. You're probably not going to be able to design a jet ski and manufacture all of that. These are things that are usually accomplished by groups of people that come together and work on these things and create new things and new abilities for us. This is basically why societies form, because if we work together, we can accomplish greater things. And so some people farm, some people manufacture, some people provide services, and we all kind of work together to expand what we're capable of, in a certain sense, expand our freedoms that we would have individually. Now, once these societies form, the question is, how do we maximize the freedom of that society? And your first inclination might be, well, let's maximize individual freedom. Let's take that slider all the way to the end, and by increasing everybody's individual freedom all the way to the max to natural freedom, where people are just unhindered by each other and doing whatever they're naturally capable of, then we're going to maximize the freedom of the whole society. Now, is that the case? No, it's not the case. So let's look at this chart real quick. So obviously there's no numbers or anything like that. This is mostly for illustration purposes, but you'll understand what I'm getting at. So we have two axes here. We have individual freedom and we have societal freedom. Now, when we maximize individual freedom to what we would call natural freedom, where everybody's just unhindered, people doing whatever they want, this is what we would call anarchy. I don't know if you're familiar with any states or countries that have been characterized by anarchy, but you'll find that in countries or states that are characterized by anarchy, they actually have a loss of freedom. So for example, let's say you want to walk out your doors at night. Well, in places where there's anarchy, that might not be such a great idea. You could get mugged, you could get raped, or just very hurt or whatever. And there's no law enforcement to stop them, so people are just free to do whatever they want and get away with it. Furthermore, you might not want to open a business because somebody could just ransack your shop and steal all your stuff, and that happens. And so businesses don't last very long because they spend all their capital to make investments, and then those just go out the window because people steal them and destroy them. Somebody could just come to your house and burn it down because they felt like it, right? It's basically like the purge. If we lived in the purge all the time, nobody would say that that's a free society. It's anarchy. It's not good. It limits what we can do. And that's a really key point, right? How other people act is going to have an impact on our freedoms as well. That's going all the way on the one side. But and obviously we know if we go all the way to the left side, this is what we usually think of as like totalitarian regimes, authoritarian regimes. There's a lot of rules, a lot of restrictions placed on people. I mean, it's basically prison. They determine what you can do, what you can't do, put heavy regulations and restrictions on the things that you can do, and that creates a much less free society as well. I feel like we are kind of keen to that or aware, particularly when we look at socialist countries like the Soviet Union or China or North Korea. We don't view those regimes as being very free. We view them as the opposite. They're not very free. There are a lot of restrictions and rules. So where we want to land is in the very top of this arch, where we are both maximizing individual freedom and societal freedom together. And this is what I'll just call true freedom. Now the question is, how do we achieve true freedom? Well, the answer is we need some kind of law, particularly like a moral law, one that we can all abide by and adhere to in order to make sure that we are taking as much freedom for ourselves without trampling on the freedoms of other people. Now, people on the right wing particularly oftentimes complain about how our freedoms are being taken away, how our rights are being trampled and things like that. And how does that come to be? Well, what generally happens is people abuse their freedoms, which causes detriment to other people. Other people get hurt because certain people abuse their freedoms, and the government steps in and is like, hey, we can't have these people getting hurt. People are tired of getting hurt because other people are abusing their freedoms. So we're going to take those freedoms away to make sure that we can keep people safe and protected. I don't think anybody would argue against the idea that as America has gone on, more restrictions have been put in place, more regulations have been put in place. You're less able to do the things that you would want to do as time has gone on. So the question is, how do we determine which acts are going to help increase our freedom overall and which ones are up to our opinion or up to our decision? What are some of the things that we want to make sure that people are adhering to? What are the things that we're allowed to give total freedom in regards to? But even taking a step further, the question arises, well, why should I care about anybody else's freedom except my own? Why shouldn't I just focus on maximizing my own freedom and just being like, screw you to everybody else. You worry about your freedom, I'm going to worry about mine. Because there have been people who have maximized their own freedom at the detriment of other people and clearly didn't care about it. Like Stalin, like Hitler, like the bigwigs at Enron. There are plenty of instances where people just totally disregard other people so that they can get whatever they want. And they just kind of leave everybody else in the dust. And the sad thing about it is a lot of these guys get away with it, at least in this life. And this really highlights the need for a moral law for people that everybody needs to adhere to. Not just a legal law, civil law, but a moral one that is higher than all of us that we all must adhere to, and that there will be consequences if we don't. Michael Ramsden, he says this about freedom. Freedom is not doing whatever you want, however you want, whenever you want to. That is not freedom, that is anarchy. And systems which are marked by anarchy are systems which are marked with the loss of freedom, not an increase of it. Freedom is a moral concept. It only exists within a moral framework. If you remove the moral framework, you don't have an increase of the amount of freedom in the system, you have a loss of it. We're not sure what it means to be free anymore, because we're not sure if we want to admit that there is some greater moral standard, greater than all of us, that we wish to acknowledge. But so long as we believe that morality will take away our freedom as opposed to preserving our freedom, we will continue to make this mistake. Do you understand what he's saying there? We tend to think that a moral law is going to cramp our lifestyle, that it's going to hinder us, it's going to make us less free. But the truth of the matter is that morality, when properly done, actually helps to expand our freedoms, right? It keeps people from getting hurt, from getting their lives destroyed. It allows us to act freely as long as we adhere to those moral guidelines. Now the question is, whose moral guidelines do we follow? I would argue that the moral code that is laid out in the Bible is intended to maximize our freedom, to minimize the damage that we do to ourselves, that we do to other people, and to allow us to walk in the greatest amount of freedom that we can. If you read the book of Deuteronomy, for example, I'm paraphrasing here, but over and over and over again, God is talking to Israel and he's saying, hey, listen, if you want to have a long, happy, healthy, prosperous life, here are the things that you need to do. Here are the things that you need to avoid. If you do those things, you don't do the other things, you're going to do fine. You're going to have a good life. It was intended to maximize the benefits in their society, both in prosperity and in freedom. So often we think that adhering to the moral law that God provides is going to give us less freedom in life. But it's the opposite. It actually maximizes our freedom. And that's the problem with sin. Sin is basically when we don't adhere to the moral law that God has provided. And sin always leads to damage, whether it's to our own lives or to other people's lives or both. And that's what God's really trying to minimize. He wants us to not be damaging ourselves and damaging other people as well. And sadly, so many times people get hurt not realizing that their actions may have caused that, or other people's actions may have caused that. And sadly, we tend to turn to the government to try to fix that. And what's the government's solution to those problems? Well, it's to take away our freedoms. When really, we should be turning to God, who wants to actually enhance our freedoms. But as Michael Ramsden had said, as we continue to think that morality will take away our freedoms instead of enhancing them, we will continue to fall into that error. Just another quote for you from a guy named Dr. William Welty. He says, "Liberty is not the freedom to do as one likes, it's the empowerment to do what one ought." Again, what he's basically saying is true freedom is not doing whatever we want, it's doing what we ought to be doing. That is how we achieve true freedom. And how do we determine what we ought to be doing? I'm going to suggest that we find those answers in the Bible. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this made sense. This one took me a few tries to get. There's a lot of interwoven thoughts, so I don't know. Hopefully it was clear to you. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions, feel free to let me know. If there's anything you want me to talk about or cover, again, I'm always open to ideas. Yeah, again, if you feel like this is helpful, please feel free to like, share, comment, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, make sure you hit the bell so you get the notifications. I think there's a way of getting notifications on Facebook, but I don't really know how, to be honest. I should probably look into that. That might help me out a little bit. But thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Au revoir.